Autism spectrum disorder has skyrocketed over the last 10 to 20 years. In fact, just 1 to 2 generations ago, the incidence of autism, kids with autism, was 1 in 1,500 kids. As I speak to you here in this video today, 1 in 36 kids are on the autism spectrum. And the biggest question that is setting in every parent, every health provider's mind is why? What is causing this incidence and this increase in the rates of autism? Now, for many, many years, over every health history that you've taken at a health provider, one of the questions that you're asked is, does this run in your family? What's your family history? Or in other words, have you inherited a certain illness, a certain health condition? And autism is one of those things that genetics has been at the top of the list for the cause of why kids are struggling. But I want to talk a little bit about today and challenge that perspective in health, because when you look at genes, there are only a certain number of genes that humans have. And only about 100 or so genes have a predisposition for autism. Yet there is not one single gene we know of that causes autism. So there is a new science, a new study of health that is called epigenetics. Now, the word epi meaning outside of our genes, epigenetics, is really starting to disprove the whole genetic theory of health when it comes to illness and sickness and even things like personality and things like that. And genetics, don't get me wrong, they do play a role in our health, but the study of epigenetics is really showing that it's not our genes that shape who we are or our health circumstances. It's the environment in which we are surrounded in that really causes those certain genes to be expressed. And when the environment triggers and cues our genetics to be expressed, that's when we experience a health scenario like autism. So I want to dig into that a little bit and talk about epigenetics and some of the things that I see as a health provider, that we have gathered information over the years when we talk to parents that bring in their kids, of different environmental cues that can cause the expression of these genetics to be exposed, to be expressed in our life and in our outcomes, and are essentially what the symptoms that we experience as associated with things like autism or ADHD or anxiety or sensory processing disorder or any of those neurodevelopmental disorders. So some of the things that I would sit down, and when I sit down with a parent, we would hear, regardless of what the kid was diagnosed with, say it was autism, say it was ADHD, whatever, the diagnosis can be different for each person. However, it was the stressors in their life or the environmental factors that I'm going to talk about here that were the same, that kept popping up over and over for each kid, for each child. We kept hearing these same things in their health history that led to ultimately where they're at currently today. Now, I want to go through and run through some examples of some of these environmental factors or environmental stressors that cause a imbalanced nervous system. And by the way, a neurodevelopmental disorder like autism is essentially a central nervous system that is severely imbalanced. And these things that I'm going to list here are signs and they're clues that if you have experienced these things or your kid is experiencing these things right now, these are signs that what I call the perfect storm ORM, the perfect storm of environmental cues that create and brew and lead a kid towards an imbalanced central nervous system that in effect cues and triggers those genetics to be expressed. So these are things, like I said, that if you notice or you're noticing right now, or you've had a kid that has seen and experienced these things, then you're going to want to watch this video, because we're going to talk about not only how we can what we can do about this to help your child get on the right track and head in a direction that's going to help them live a better quality of life. So the first thing that we see commonly is prenatal and maternal stress. So this goes all the way back to pregnancy, right? If the mom is experiencing stress during her pregnancy or even before conception, that can be an environmental factor that triggers this and gets this perfect storm of events brewing in that imbalanced nervous system dysregulation disorder that we talked about. And basically, any stress that mom is going through, the baby is going through as well. These things can be negative stressors. They can be things like um, you're in a bad relationship, you're financially struggling, all of those type of negative stresses, but it can also be positive stresses. Maybe you just moved to a new state. Maybe you just bought a new house and you're rushing and you're stressed about getting the house ready and the nursery ready, and you're painting the nursery and doing all these things to get the things ready before the baby comes. It can be you got a new job. Maybe you're working full time as a pregnant mom. Any stress, whether it's positive or negative, our brain, our nervous system doesn't know the difference. Any too much stress, too much prenatal or maternal stress can start to shift things into a state of fight or flight or stress. And when you have a stressful pregnancy and stressful prenatal time, oftentimes that leads to a stressful birth. So the next most common thing that we see in a children's case history or a child's case history is birth intervention or injury. So this could be a emergency C-section. This could be a vacuum extraction delivery, a C-section, of a forceps vacuum or forceps delivery. It could be a cord wrapped around the neck during the birth process. It could be getting stuck in the birth canal and a shoulder dystocia, or the baby just coming right out, like one push and boom, they just come flying out. There's many different interventions and types of stress, not to mention the fact that a normal vaginal delivery is stressful enough, I'm sure, as you moms know. A normal vaginal delivery creates upwards of 40 to 60 pounds of pulling and twisting on the baby's head and neck. And any added intervention on top of that, like for instance, a C-section delivery, which, by the way, if we talk about some of the little things that have caused an higher incidence of things like autism and neurodevelopmental disorder, the incidence of C-section delivery has increased over the past 30 years dramatically. The increase in our livelihood stress has increased dramatically over the past couple decades. So what we're really getting at and hinting towards is the more stress, the more incidence of neurodevelopmental disorder, because that's what causes neurodevelopmental disorder in the first place, is an increase in that shift towards fight or flight, stress, sympathetic dominance within the central nervous system, and thus creating an imbalance to the nervous system. But you have a stressful pregnancy, leads to a stressful birth intervention or birth injury, and oftentimes that leads to a need for early exposure to things like antibiotics and steroids and all those other things that are not, by the way, thank goodness we have the medical technology to do C-section deliveries and emergency C-sections, and thank goodness we have medications that save lives and help kids that are struggling. But oftentimes when you have all of these stressors, what does that lead to? A stressed out, fussy, colicky baby that's sick all the time with ear infections and has constipation and is getting Miralax all the time and getting rounds and rounds of antibiotics which disrupt the gut. So we now know that the gut-brain connection is a thing. The things that calm our brain, the things that make us feel happy and excited, and all those things that are associated with good health, mental health, in terms of focus and as it pertains to kids, regulation of emotions and all those things, are generated in the gut. Well, if we are having a stressful pregnancy, a stressful birth, and now we got loads and loads of antibiotics because your kid is having ear infections and sinus infections and strep throat and all these different things, that is destroying the gut. The area where all those neurotransmitters for the brain that calm us and relax us are created. So that just causes and brews that perfect storm to be even bigger, even bigger. And then as kids nowadays, some more things that weren't as common that we're now finding more in research are different things like EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, Wi-Fi signals, cell phone signals. Those are things that we never had 30, 40 years ago. We didn't have Wi-Fi energies interacting with our body and our cells. Mold exposure and toxicity, those things are becoming more and more studied and more prevalent, that are toxins to our body that create dysfunction in our body. Household toxins, I mean preservatives and detergents and chemicals and things that we breathe in, and cleaning chemicals and soaps and all these different things, candles, air fresheners, all these things are toxins to our body that create a shift, a stress on our central nervous system that our body has to deal with. So when you sum up all of these things and you think about over the past 10, 20 years, how it's affected the functionality of our body and in turn our central nervous system, all of these things brew this perfect storm that we talk about in our office every single day. So when we combine all these things and we add it all up and we put all these ingredients together and we see these signs in a health history, it gives us more and more confidence that this is the cause of things like autism, things like ADHD, things like sensory processing disorder. And yes, when you are predisposed with certain genetics and certain genes, it makes this stuff, kids even more sensitive to these things. One more thing that's a huge thing that I didn't even think about is red dyes and yellow dyes and all the different things that are in our foods. And if you don't believe me, whether your kid is struggling with a challenge or not, when they have red dye, when they have yellow dye, when they have things like that, it makes them go bounce off the walls. Trust me, I see it now. I never believed it when I was a kid and my parents wouldn't let me have certain like Mountain Dew or certain things like that because they said it made me bounce off the walls. I never believed that when I was growing up, but now that I have my own kids and I see how their emotional regulation changes, how their attitude and their livelihood changes, the way they navigate life changes when they have things like red dyes and all that, man, it makes a difference. So all of these things add up to create this perfect storm of events that causes this imbalance to our central nervous system. So as neurologically focused chiropractors, the way that we are able to help is by addressing and measuring how their central nervous system is functioning. And we do that with insight scans. Insight scans are measuring a couple different things. These tests, they're non-invasive. They're scans that are measuring how their central nervous system is functioning and how the neuromuscular energy in their body is being expressed. And once we get those scans and we see how the central nervous system is functioning and operating, it gives us, and we combine that with the clues that we find in their health history, it gives us a way that we can address and come up with a specialized care plan for each and every individual, not to treat autism, not to treat or diagnose their symptoms. It is to balance their central nervous system. And when the more of this stuff you have, typically the more imbalanced that central nervous system is. And chiropractic care is designed to balance the central nervous system. And when we do that, and we do it well enough and long enough and consistently enough to get their nervous system that's shifted into a state of stress, all the way balanced back to where it is designed to be, good things happen. You see a change in their emotion. You see a change in their behavior and their outbursts and their sleep patterns and their digestion and their immune system, because we are balancing their nervous system, and their nervous system is no longer in stress mode. It is able to rest, digest, relax, grow, heal, and be regulated. So this is a kind of a little more in-depth video than what we typically do, but I hope that this sets well with you. And if you have any more questions, I would invite you to come to this workshop at Havana Coffee Shop on April 30th, Tuesday evening, where we are going to dive even deeper than we are in this video into how the root cause, and we're also going to give you some action steps that you guys can implement that evening to help get your kid on a path towards living a better quality of life. So thanks for watching this video. Please register for our upcoming Perfect Storm event, and I can't wait to meet you there.